as well as Northern Ireland after around midnight. Some heavy bursts and some wet weather expected in places overnight, but drier to the east, even if it is increasingly gloomy by dawn. A lot of low cloud around, some mist and hill fog. A few cloud breaks are possible, but on the whole, it's generally a grey start to the day, a mild start because we've still got this southerly wind direction, so by 7 a.m, 14 or 15 Celsius. However, for southwest England, for parts of Wales and Northern Ireland, we've got those outbreaks of heavier rain. Some showers pushing into the northwest of England and western Scotland. Drier to the east, but a lot of cloud. Just a few breaks possible there for the northeast of Scotland. Otherwise, for many, well, it is a overcast start to Friday morning and doesn't brighten up much through the morning either, except for the southwest, where we do get some breaks in the cloud returning by the afternoon, albeit with an increasing breeze and some showers. Meanwhile, cloud and rain slowly moves into the Midlands and the southeast. Some heavy bursts, but generally it fizzles out. It's another mild day, but it's not quite as mild as Thursday. By the start of Saturday, the cloudier and wetter weather is confined to the northwest of Scotland. Still some showery rain in the southeast, but otherwise it's a clear start to the day. A few fog patches, they lift into sunny spells. Sunday's also mostly fine for much of the country with some decent spells of sunshine, but for northwestern Scotland there'll be some heavy rain.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed boiler repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win a whopping £36,000 cash in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having £3,000 each month for an entire year. Extra cash in your bank account that you can do whatever you like with. Make sure you don't miss out. Get your entry in now. Just one entry could make you the winner. For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB08 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close 5 p.m. this Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Budget Day on GB News on Wednesday. Stay with us all day for the most anxiously anticipated budget in a generation.
Morning through to evening, we'll be here with insight
and analysis, crunching the numbers
as we work out the cost to the country and, most importantly, to you.
Because the Chancellor has a bill to pay. The question is...
who's going to pay it? Budget Day all day Wednesday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, the Prime Minister has been left looking somewhat foolish at the Commonwealth Summit after leaders ignore him and demand meaningful reparation talks. I'll reveal how this is, at least to some extent, Starmer's doing. As the rift between Donald Trump and Sir Keir Starmer grows, I will say who I think will be the best US presidential candidate in the interests of this country, the United Kingdom. Labour is going back to its old ways, with Angela Rayner set to make it easier for unions to stop work in a return to the 1970s, just as her own staff demand a 4-day, quotes, working week. Plus, the Reform Party continues to have an effect. As a poll shows it is more popular than Labour, I'll be assessing the insurgent party's latest strategy to cement itself in the political landscape. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most intellectual panel, GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and the journalist and former Conservative MP, Michael Brown. As you know, as ever, it's a crucial part of the programme. I want to hear your views. Send them in, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. These are your headlines from the GB Newsroom. Rachel Reeves has said she will rewrite Britain's debt rules at her budget next week to free up £50 billion to help fund long-term investment. The Chancellor confirmed she will change how debt is calculated to take into account investment spending. It comes as she pledged to get debt falling by the end of this Parliament. But Shadow Leader of the House of Commons, Chris Philp, accused the Chancellor of broken promises.
The Chancellor has been dishonest with the British public. She promised before the election she would not fiddle the borrowing rules. She fought and won the general election with a certain set of plans, and within a matter of weeks she has ripped those up, and worse than that, she's ripped them up in America. She hasn't even had the courtesy of telling the House of Commons. So these are broken promises, huge amounts of extra borrowing that were not disclosed during the general election.
Now, the UK apologising for its role in the slave trade is not on the agenda, according to Number 10, as the row engulfing the Commonwealth Summit continues. Sir Keir Starmer remains clear that we should be facing forward amid mounting pressure from Caribbean nations. However, the Bahamas Foreign Minister says justice is about more than money. They say it's about addressing the lasting impact of slavery. Meanwhile, the King is to use his first speech as the head of the Commonwealth to say it is important to recognise the path of history amid the reparations row. GB News can reveal an imminent rise in Channel migrant crossings, with numbers expected to exceed last year's total within just 48 hours. At least 400 migrants are anticipated to have made the journey by the end of today, following 5 boat arrivals this morning, carrying over 250 people to the Border Force Processing Centre in Dover. A further 3 small boats were seen heading towards UK waters by lunchtime, taking the number of arrivals so far this year to more than 29,000. In other news, 2 former Tory councillors in Scotland have defected to Reform UK, giving the party its first elected politicians north of the border. The move comes as leader Nigel Farage issued a call for Tory councillors to quit and join his party. Reform said the decision by Mark Findlater and Laurie Carney, who are both sitting on the Aberdeenshire Council, demonstrated that the Tory brand is broken across the UK. And some breaking news to bring to you. The government's proposed ban on smoking in pub gardens is on the brink of being dropped by Sir Keir Starmer. The Sun newspaper is reporting that the government is set to drop its proposed anti-smoking ban over concerns it would be the death knell for British pubs. Instead, smoking is only expected to be prohibited outside hospitals and schools. The U-turn move follows an outcry from Brits and businesses. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Not for the first time this week, the Prime Minister has been left looking a little foolish after a 27-hour flight to Samoa to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. After having said the question of reparations should not be discussed at the summit, the Foreign Minister of the Bahamas disclosed Caribbean nations were seeking to include the proposal on the final communiqué from the summit, ignoring the Reverend Starmer. Now, you may be pleased the PM is trying to prevent taxpayers forking out billions of pounds, but he was involved in raising this issue in the first place. Indeed, if Starmer had had his way in 2019, that is, if Jeremy Corbyn had become Prime Minister, we could already be on the way to paying reparations. The manifesto Starmer stood on in 2019 explicitly stated the party would, quote, conduct an audit of the impact of Britain's colonial legacy to understand our contribution to the dynamics of violence and insecurity across regions previously under British colonial rule. Since losing that election, Sir Keir did not and has not distanced himself from this pledge. Indeed, it was less than a year later in 2020 when he took the knee to defund the police, the Black Lives Matter mob, less than 48 hours after the statue of Colston was toppled, as well as riots unfolding across the country, with policemen being injured. The following year, an official Labour Party report claimed, in recognition of the past wrongdoings of the British state, the new constitution should make an unreserved apology to all of the countries of the world that the Empire invaded and negatively impacted. They ought to be found guilty of sins against the English language for negatively impacted, but never mind. In addition, the British state should set up a reparations fund as part of the Constitution, which offers financial assistance to communities across the world that can show loss of detriment as a result of the actions of the British state. This was a report admittedly set up by Corbyn, but Starmer made no attempt to disassociate himself from it. In fact, he then went on the same year to make this man his Foreign Secretary.
So reparations, what does that look like for those Caribbean nations? How do we make that work? What's the dialogue we as a country need to have?
Part of that discussion then brings the story of reparations back on the table. Because the truth is that the people who got reparations after slavery were the slave owners.
So Starmer has had every opportunity to abandon this ridiculous policy, but he's never done so. Indeed, what was one of the first policies he enacted to become Prime Minister? Well, he handed the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, a close ally of China. It really is no wonder that the Commonwealth nations are feeling emboldened on the question of reparations. Indeed, the aforementioned Bahmanian Foreign Minister's statement says it all.
It seems unusual to us because you've got the Labour Party in power, and this, we thought, was something that the Conservative Party in the UK would be the progenitor of, and that Labour would certainly change its position on this. And particularly since you have an Afro-British man as the Foreign Secretary, to put him in a position where he's advancing a position that no reparations, no discussion on reparations. So I think a very frank conversation has to be had on this. Given Sir Keir's work before he became Prime Minister, given Mr. Lamy's position before he got this job that he has now, they bring their individual consciences to this job, and I think eventually they'll come around to the position.
What's so interesting about that is that people have listened to what Starmer and Lamy said before the election. They knew the Tories wouldn't pay reparations, but they think Labour will because of what they've said before. And as ever, it would be you, the British people, footing the bill. As always, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined now by former Labour Party advisor Matthew Torbit. Matthew, welcome to the programme. Thank you for coming in again. Is Keir Starmer, to some extent, being hoisted by his own petard, that he began talking about this, he didn't close it down as leader of the opposition, and that's built up expectations amongst the Caribbean nations?
Possibly. I think the term I was thinking of was hoisted on his own petard, and I think he probably, because I'd probably forgot that was even in the 2019 manifesto, but you stand on something, you sort of have to stand for it, really, or you stand for nothing. I suppose the argument would be, but we've not stood on it on this election. The wording has changed slightly and there isn't going to be an audit. I think certainly we will see what he's made of this week. And as an ardent trade unionist, he's going to need some good negotiators in the room, because their argument, the other side, the sort of Barbadians, the Caribbeans and the Africans will say, well, yeah, but you've said all this now, so you can't just go back on things you've said previously. You either believe in it or you don't. I imagine there will be a folding of sorts. He's either got to offer some sort of carrot to a lot of these nations to sort of say, stick with me, let's just get me through this communique. Or I can foresee something where there will be an ongoing dialogue about, you know, what happened 200 years ago plus and stuff like that. That's the only way I can see him getting round it.
But appointing David Lammy seems to have compounded the mistake, because David Lammy, as a backbencher, made a lot of comments about reparations. We had a couple of clips in the monologue that it's very hard for David Lammy to disassociate himself from everything he said when he was not in office.
This is part of the problem in politics, when you appoint people by faction or loyalty and not really delve into what people have stood for before. I think David Lammy's got a fair argument if he believes that you know, reparations should be paid back to countries that were affected by the transatlantic slave trade. I think there's an economic argument potentially, there's a moral argument, it's a very useful academic argument. I think the practicalities, especially us on the left who you know, believe in doing the right thing, want to do the right thing. Once it enters sort of reality and the practicalities of doing that, it tends to fall by the wayside.
I think the practicalities are very important. I don't agree with the moral argument. But with Windrush, somebody like me was very keen that British citizens who had been badly treated by the British state deserved compensation. They were individuals, they were badly treated, you could identify them, you could put things right. But slavery was outlawed in the British Empire in the 1830s. There's nobody alive, there's not the child of somebody alive who was actually directly affected by this. And therefore, who on earth does the money go to? Well, governments want it, of course they do. But is that a reparation, or is that just a boondoggle for modern politicians?
This is part of the problem, and where the practicalities enter. I think there's a moral argument. I disagree slightly. I think the UK government and institutions within this country did profit off the backs of slaves in Africa and the Caribbean.
Yes, but we did spend an awful lot of money then stopping the slave trade. So if you were to take the balance from, say, 1650 to 1950, we probably spend more on putting the slave trade down than we profited from it in the earlier period.
But it wasn't an instant process. I think the First Act came through, and I think countries that we sort of still oversaw and territories at the time still continued with slavery later on. And I think the difference is, I mean, people like to throw up things like the Roman Empire, and, you know, it's a fair argument that no slavery is good slavery, right? But I think this is still directly traceable. There may not be people alive that can remember that. We're not far from it when the last slave died in the early 1900s, if I remember rightly, in the west coast of America. But we're talking 1,000 years ago when it comes to the Roman Empire. People can still trace their lineage back to slavery.
But it's very complex, because Gordon of Khartoum annexes Sudan because he's trying to stop slavery. So you have a colonial expansion that you might now say was a wrong thing to do, but it was done for a good purpose. Is that a good or bad thing to do? This is where I think it gets so difficult to make judgments of the history.
No, I agree, and that's why I don't feel I know where I stand on it. I understand the morals of it, but I think I'm someone that likes to get things done. And I've seen all sorts of suggestions. I never think slavery is a good idea. I think regardless of what outcomes come from it, and whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, I think it's not something that should be done. However, if we give it to politicians, who's to say they're the best people to know exactly what to do with that money? If I saw somebody last week talk about tax breaks for people who may be descendants of people from the Caribbean and Africa, but you're going to cause a bit of a two-tier society. Now, people who are black and ethnic minorities in this country may argue there's already a two-tier society. So then I don't see how this can be done, basically, and I think that's where the argument dies a death a little bit.
One very quick thought, where will Keir Starmer end up on this?
In trouble.
No, that's a very good answer. Thank you very much, Matthew. In a moment, I'll be revealing which candidate in the US presidential election I think will be best for the UK amidst the widening gap between Donald Trump and Sir Keir Starmer as the row over Labour people going to help broadens, widens and deepens. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel. This week, Free Speech Brighton, a sister group of the Free Speech Union, claimed that they were kicked out of a pub in the city for discussing trans issues in schools. The group booked a room in a pub for an evening of speeches and discussion when they claimed security guards came and asked them to leave after one speaker began to talk about this topic. Now, a clip of the evening was, in fact, posted to social media. Can you give us some background to what happened, what the event was for, and why you booked it?
Our normal pub was being refurbished, so about 3 weeks ago I went in and booked a local pub for a meeting, and they didn't ask any questions about what sort of meeting. It was in a back room. It was mainly secluded from the rest of the pub, so I thought it would be fine. But anyway, they didn't ask any questions. They took my booking. We arrived, I set up. The first speaker started speaking, who's a retired teacher who is concerned about trans in schools and how that affects children. But she was talking purely about children. She was not talking about adults who have protected characteristics, obviously. And then towards the end of her speech, I became aware of security guards standing behind me in the middle room. So I went to have a quick word with them and see what they wanted. And they said, we've had a complaint. And I said, what's the complaint? And they wouldn't say. Then they said, will you come and talk to the landlord? So I went to the front of the bar and they indicated this chap was the landlord, but he looked about 20, so I don't think he was the landlord. So I said, I hear you have a complaint about us. Can you tell me what it is? And he couldn't.
That sounds very Kafkaesque, as though you've committed a crime, but they can't tell you what the crime is.
Well, that's what I couldn't understand, because, you know, obviously they can't tell you who the complainant is, but they should be able to tell you what the complaint is.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player app. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Well, welcome back. We were talking about reparations, and Sakir, the Reverend Starmer, and the Mailmogs have come in. Angela says, why should people who have never owned slaves make reparation to people who have never been slaves? Angela, that is brilliant. You have summed up this whole debate in one sentence. The most intelligent panel won't be able to keep up with my most intelligent male mogs. Steve says, Starmer will give reparations not by that name, but by means of extra aid or investment. That said, he's lied to the British people, so why not to the Commonwealth? That's tough stuff from Steve. The rift between Donald Starmer and the Reverend Keir Starmer continues to widen as it emerged. Sue Gray's replacement as Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, attended the Democratic National Convention, which was paid for by the Labour Party, with the Republicans filing an official complaint to the Federal Election Commission, not necessarily about McSweeney, but about other activities. But what I really want to discuss today is why I think a Donald Trump victory in the US presidential elections is in the best interests of the United Kingdom. Well, with me now is my panel, GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and the journalist and former Conservative, Michael Brown. Nigel, my point is that I'm not an American, I don't have a vote. It's not for me to decide who is the best president for the United States. It's who is going to be the closest ally of the UK. And we've seen with Joe Biden, and indeed we saw with Barack Obama, two Democrat presidents who didn't actually like the UK. We saw with Donald Trump somebody who loved the UK, adored the Queen, and wanted to be as helpful as he could be. And I think a Donald re-election is in our interests.
Well, what about the 10% tariffs that we might have to face? I mean, it looks to me like the free trade deal that was almost ready-baked, according to Boris, isn't. And also there's the issue of Ukraine, that Donald Trump has been very lukewarm about Ukraine. It looks as if he'll try and cut a deal with Putin. None of those things strike me as in Britain's interests.
Well, on trade, he offered free trade to the whole of the G7 as long as they got rid of their trade barriers. I think that's a great opportunity for us, and we're outside Europe, so his hostility to the EU shouldn't affect us as long as Keir Starmer doesn't offend him by campaigning against him.
Well, I mean, the campaigning against him, I mean, that's something that Labour has always done. I mean, it's quite clear that as far as Kamala Harris goes, that she's far closer politically to Labour. So I can understand that. They're going over there as volunteers. They've always done this.
I understand
remember
all of that, but the sensitivities are so much greater in recent years after Russian involvement, foreign country involvement, sensitivities of Donald Trump. And crucially, they're in government. In the last 14 years, if they've gone over, they've been in opposition, and nobody cares what opposition parties do.
They went in government. I mean, I remember them going over. I mean, Peter Mandelson, I remember phoning me from Bill Clinton's campaign after '97.
But John Major did that against Bill Clinton very unsuccessfully and caused a great rift in relations.
Yeah, I mean, the question really is, will Keir Starmer get on with Donald Trump? He will do his best to do it. Whoever the American president is, he would do that.
Michael, I think it's very important that we get on with the American president. I think we just have a better chance of doing that with Trump than with Kamala Harris.
You may be right. I take a more purist view. I simply think that it is wrong, as a matter of principle, for us to pontificate on which will be the better president. Because, as you rightly said in your introduction, we don't have, unless we're an American citizen, we don't have a dog in the fight. I would take great umbrage, Jacob, if during the recent general election somebody from South Carolina or wherever had knocked on my door on behalf of either the Republican or Democrat Party.
But that's why I phrase myself very carefully. I'm not saying who Americans should vote for. I'm saying who I think is in British interests.
Well,
which I think one is entitled to say.
Yes,
I'm not going out to campaign for Donald Trump because I think it would be counterproductive.
Exactly. Bluntly, I think it is utterly counterproductive for somebody in a swing state to have either somebody from the Tory party on behalf of Trump or somebody from the Labour Party on behalf of Kamala Harris.
The glorious example of that county in Ohio, where the Guardian readers wrote in.
It was a disaster.
And there was a swing to George W. Bush ahead of the national swing.
I'm afraid nobody, and I've given you the picture, nobody...
Well, let's hold this up.
That is me meeting President Reagan just after his second term in the Roosevelt room of the White House, and I'm afraid I haven't got over either his leaving the White House or his death.
So you weren't actually campaigning for him?
No, it was after an election. I was invited by Winston Churchill's grandson, 2 MPs from this country and other countries. But that was after
election. It's amazing how little you've changed. You've dyed your hair grey since then, but otherwise exactly the same.
Well, I've been, I think I was 34. I was born in 1951, so I was 34. But it was the most magnificent experience that I've ever had. I'm afraid no Republican president has ever lived up to that one ever since.
And when you visited the Oval Office, did you feel the
Roosevelt room?
The Roosevelt room, sorry.
He wanted to give us lunch.
Did you feel the raw power of the American presidency?
Absolutely. Margaret Thatcher had just been elected in 1984. He was elected in the November 1984 in a landslide, and we kept well out of it. The one thing that I did agree with Alistair Campbell over was when in the year 2000, Al Gore was expected to win, tied with George W. Bush, and Alistair Campbell said, we're not getting involved after the experience, as you rightly pointed out just now, of John Major.
And look, I'm not Tony Blair's greatest fan for what he achieved politically. I mean, he was a perfectly pleasant man. But his great success was managing to get on with 2 very different US presidents. And it seems to me this is a really important skill for a British Prime Minister. And I'm worried that Starmer has already blotted his copybook with Trump, who, it looks, according to the betting markets and Wall Street, is now more likely to win than not?
Well, I think that, as Michael said a bit earlier about Trump being oversensitive, because this has been going on for so long, nobody over here would have thought there was any problem at all asking people to volunteer in their own time to go over and help with the election campaign and learn from it. Because one of the great things about doing it is you learn a great deal over
election
there.
techniques.
Very much so. So it is in their interest. But the fact this has been going on for so many years, and suddenly we have a candidate who is now getting really uppity about it.
But isn't Michael right that a clever political operator like Alistair Campbell, in the Duke of Wellington terms, knows what's over the other side of the hill, and therefore knows that Trump is sensitive and therefore will react badly, that politics isn't about saying, well, this has always happened and therefore it will be fine. It's about saying, well, this has changed and we need to do something.
But the other thing about Trump is he'll get over it. That Trump will say a lot of things, as we know. I mean, he said a number of strange things during the election that probably won't happen after it, just as he did back in 2016.
This is where I hope, and this is my one concern, which you touched on, I hope that Trump will do different things on Ukraine.
By the way,
because I think Ukraine is the one most worrying thing about the Trump
I think
presidency.
the most important appointment that Keir Starmer has to make, which he's reserving quite rightly until after the election, is the choice of our ambassador to Washington. The current ambassador, I think, is wonderful. Dame Karen Pierce.
She's done a very good job.
Hugely great job.
After the chap before, who was a disaster.
Precisely. But I think that Keir Starmer must choose a successor worthy, like she is, of the office.
OK, so who's your candidate if Donald wins?
I think, and you're going to fall off your chair when I say this, I think Peter Mandelson.
He's a very silken operator.
Yes, and they will love him over there. He will have grand parties. It's necessary. He will be able to charm the birds off the tree, and I would put him there.
Right.
It's right that it should be a political appointment in these unique circumstances.
Well, I'm hoping that will upset GB News viewers that it's Nigel Farage who will make life a good deal easier for the Conservative Party if he becomes Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to the United States. Thank you to my panel. In a moment, we'll be looking at how Labour is set to return the UK to the darkest days of the winter of discontent as industrial inaction rights are set to be expanded under Rayner's regime.
Hi there, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. We've seen cloud progressively build in the west all day, and that cloud will bring heavy rain overnight. In the east, it's drier, but even here, increasingly cloudy as an area of low pressure moves into Ireland, bringing a slow-moving weather front, hence the advancing cloud through the day. But that cloud will be thick enough to bring showery rain into the southwest and then Wales through the evening, as well as Northern Ireland after around midnight. Some heavy bursts and some wet weather expected in places overnight, but drier to the east, even if it is increasingly gloomy by dawn. A lot of low cloud around, some mist and hill fog. A few cloud breaks are possible, but on the whole, it's generally a grey start to the day, a mild start because we've still got this southerly wind direction, so by 7 a.m, 14 or 15 Celsius. However, for southwest England, for parts of Wales and Northern Ireland, we've got those outbreaks of heavier rain. Some showers pushing into the northwest of England and western Scotland. Drier to the east, but a lot of cloud. Just a few breaks possible there for the northeast of Scotland. Otherwise, for many, well, it is a overcast start to Friday morning and doesn't brighten up much through the morning either, except for the southwest, where we do get some breaks in the cloud returning by the afternoon, albeit with an increasing breeze and some showers. Meanwhile, cloud and rain slowly moves into the Midlands and the southeast. Some heavy bursts, but generally it fizzles out. It's another mild day, but it's not quite as mild as Thursday. By the start of Saturday, the cloudier and wetter weather is confined to the northwest of Scotland. Still some showery rain in the southeast, but otherwise it's a clear start to the day. A few fog patches, they lift into sunny spells. Sunday's also mostly fine for much of the country with some decent spells of sunshine, but for northwestern Scotland there'll be some heavy rain.
Budget Day on GB News on Wednesday. Stay with us all day for the most anxiously anticipated budget in a generation.
Morning through to evening, we'll be here with insight and analysis, crunching the numbers
as we work out the cost to the country and, most importantly, to you.
Because the Chancellor has a bill to pay. The question is...
who's going to pay it? Budget Day all day Wednesday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about Trump versus Starmer and my view of who's in British best interests for the election. And Roger doesn't agree with me. Are you kidding, Jacob? Trump is no friend of ours. If this were 1939 and it were Trump, not Roosevelt, he would have left us to our fate. I don't know. Churchill had to work quite hard to get Roosevelt on board. And Margaret says, will the taxpayer have to pay for the debacle surrounding Labour volunteers campaigning in the States if Donald Trump takes Labour to court? It's a very interesting point. I don't think so. I think it will be a domestic US matter. But anyway, I don't know is the honest answer. Now, some of us are old enough to remember the winter of discontent of 1978 to 1979. You may say I was only a 9-year-old, but I was very interested in politics even then, when the country was plagued by industrial inaction, inflation, a struggling public sector, when the dead weren't buried and rubbish piled up in Leicester Square as the dustmen were on strike. Well, today's news that the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, Red Rayner, is drawing up plans to extend union rights to strike up to a year after balloting members reminds us that this is the same old socialist Labour Party. This comes as staff from her own department in the civil service are demanding to do even less work, going down to 4 days a week. But Ms Rayner is currently resisting these plans. I wonder how long that will last. Still with me is my most intellectual panel, GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and journalist and former Conservative MP Michael Brown. Michael, the 4th of May, 1979. I was there. One great man gets elected on the back of the winter of discontent.
That's yours truly.
You remember it well. Are we going back to this same approach to dealing with the unions?
Well, if I was being entirely wishing for the worst for the Labour government and the best for the Conservative Party, I would pray that they do this, because if we get a winter of discontent 5 years down the track, but for that winter of discontent, I won my seat by 486 votes. If Callaghan had called the election 6 months earlier, I'd have lost. So I am always grateful to the Labour Party for those awful industrial relations of the 1970s, because but for that, I wouldn't have won the election in 1979. But if I'm being loyal to the country, I think back also to 1997, when the Labour government of Tony Blair accepted the settlement, the universal settlement that had been established bit by bit, step by step by Jim Pryor and Margaret Thatcher during the long years of the 1980s when he was Secretary of State for Employment in our government. The Labour Party in office between 1997 and 2010 did not alter significantly, if at all, any of that settlement. We've got a settlement. Now, if they upset the apple cart, they have only themselves to blame when it all goes wrong.
Which they're not doing. They're not
but
upsetting apple
hasn't
carts.
Michael got this right? That Blair basically understood this and accepted the settlement. And Angela Rayner wants to change the settlement. She wants to make strike easier, only 2% representation of unions, and they'll be able to call strikes and so on.
Well, not quite. No, the 2% thing is actually to be able to organise within a company.
But then you'll be able to strike once you've organised.
You seem to sort of take the idea that the moment the unions get in, strikes are inevitable.
Yes, they are.
But they're not. I mean, this is not 45 years ago. This is now. And we should be in a situation where we're actually working, businesses and unions work together for the mutual benefit of that business.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
And that can happen.
But changing the length of time a strike ballot is valid, that seems to me to be a great mistake, because
it's administrative.
It's much more than administrative.
It's not, Nigel.
But it changes the dynamic of a negotiation.
Exactly. If you give the opportunity for a ballot to be valid for a year, it means that if you are on strike against your will as a striker who doesn't feel that your union is delivering the negotiations, you at least have the opportunity to return to the ballot. And very often, ballots are brought to an end after 6 months, on the will of the strikers themselves. That opportunity, that's like going back, we'll eventually end up with a closed shop if we carry on down that road.
Well, I was always against the closed shop, although when I was the journalist equivalent of a shop steward, it was actually quite useful to have. But no, we're not going to close shop.
Useful for you, but not for the ordinary members.
No, I was always against it. I didn't feel that people should have to join a union to be employed. So while the closed shop was useful to me as a negotiator, it wasn't terribly... I thought in principle it was wrong, and I was glad to see it abolished.
Glad to hear
but it makes your job much more difficult if you're actually negotiating something. When it comes down to actually extending the mandate for a year, the whole point is that you should be able to settle strikes within that period. And where we went wrong with the last government was they wouldn't sit down with the unions to try and thrash out a deal. Labour come in and get that deal done immediately.
But this is a straightforward reward to the union barons for services rendered in the recent
This was done through independent pay review bodies, and there's no point in having independent pay review bodies if you're not going to listen to the recommendations.
But it's going to apply to the private sector far more, Nigel. It's going to apply. It's not just the public sector. It's going to apply for the private sector.
The railway drivers just got a huge amount of money for no good reason. That wasn't a pay review body.
That wasn't a pay review body, but I mean,
it's just a bung to Labour friends. But whilst they were taking money away from pensioners, it was outrageous.
Well, you could always argue the same thing about the junior doctors, but if you work out the settlement that junior doctors got, it wasn't a great deal more than the 5.5% that went to nurses.
But it was more than the nurses.
It was more, but it was over a longer period.
And junior doctors are richer than nurses.
But it was over a longer period. So it was roughly within... And the same thing with the train drivers. Roughly, you're talking about the kind of settlement that would actually work.
But for people very well paid. Anyway, in other news of Labour's failures, within a matter of days, the number of channel crossings is expected to surpass that of last year's total of 29,000. And we're only in October. So much for smashing the gangs and cooperating with our European partners to solve the problem. They haven't done very well on this either, have they?
Well, give them a chance.
They abolished the Rwanda scheme. That's what they've had the chance.
Oh, look, the Rwanda scheme was running it was
getting people to go to the Republic of Ireland.
The Rwanda scheme was a threat in 22, and then we were talking about 45,000 migrants crossing the Channel. So the threat of Rwanda made absolutely no difference to migrants coming across. Now, I don't think we're going to stop it. At least Keir Starmer has not made the reckless promise that Rishi Sunak did to stop the boats. You probably won't be able to do that if it works with his new Border Security Command and they can disrupt the smuggling gangs. You should then see the number of migrants crossing
but
slow
everyone's
down.
always been trying to disrupt the smuggling gangs. There's been no government that says, oh, let's give a bit of help to the smuggling gangs.
Well, yes,
there's no change in policy there. It's just a
there is a change in policy, but the idea now is to use terror laws or terror tactics to try and deal with them.
I think that Rob Jenrick's got it right. We are never going to do this until we change our relationship with the European Convention on Human Rights.
We're going to... I think we've just hit the equivalent of the whole of last year's illegal immigration into this country. And where are we? Mid-October. So it'll be 40,000 by the end of this year. There is no incentive... Yes, it will. It will.
That's a nonsense. We're actually coming to the end of October.
Well, look, 500 to 600 people are coming in nearly every day, so long as the weather's good, and the weather remains good even during winter. If you just look at the statistics for the early part of this year, in the run-up to the summer election, in the early part of this year, a huge amount are coming in. But bluntly, Starmer does not have any intention of doing anything other than the words that I'm afraid we had from Sunak. And the only way to deal with it, and ironically, it is the European Union, I can't believe I'm saying this, Ursula von der Leyen held a conference last week with other Home Office ministers in the EU, and it seems to me that the Maloney answer of forcible
yeah, but they're stuck too, because the European courts are overruling them. So Maloney hasn't been able to do it. It's the same issue. It's actually the ECJ, I think, for Italy under the Charter of Fundamental Rights, but it's the same idea as the European Convention.
One thing I am certain of is that the mantra used to be stop the boats. Now it is smash the gangs. Well, there's no way that Starmer is going to take any necessary action on that. It's just simply not going to happen. The people of this country need to understand that this this is not going to stop for the remainder of this period of office of this Labour government. Another 5 years of it, 500 a day.
It doesn't really care, does it?
Yeah, it does care.
It goes through the motions because its voters care. But Labour is the party of mass migration.
Well, that's a nonsense.
All right, tell me why. It always has been. It believes in international labour and all those lefty things.
Well, I mean, some people believe in it. I think international labour has rather gone out the window, actually, with the modern Labour Party, but still. When it comes down to migration, if we talk about the legal migration, that should be what the economy needs. That's a very different thing. You're not let in huge numbers of people. You plan to let in 600,000 students a year to try and keep the universities funded. Then you change your mind and said, no, that we don't want that many people. Now the universities will have to raise tuition fees as a result of that. Immigration has been a mess under every government.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, and that's under every government.
Well, since John Major, actually.
Yes,
last
basically.
person, and Michael Howard, who had a proper immigration policy. So it can be done.
Well, but it hasn't been done. The point is that every time someone comes up with some idea that might work, it doesn't. Rwanda, there was never any evidence.
Because we've got to pull out of the European Convention of Human Rights to make these things work.
No, I mean...
Because we get hamstrung by the legal system that is overriding the will of Parliament. We've got to assert parliamentary sovereignty.
Well, in which case, then, you pull out of international law. So you pull out of the Refugee Convention, you pull out of a number of other UN conventions.
Most European countries simply ignore it.
Well, I mean,
they are signed up. They beat their breasts and say, we're signed up to the ECHR. But most of the time, a lot of the countries now, I mean, I've just come back from Germany. The last weekend, half my family come from Germany. And there, they are finally getting the wind up because of shootings by migrants. There was an incident about 6 weeks ago, which has really frightened Germany, and the political consequences are there for us all to see when that next.
But the only point of leaving the European Convention would be to get Rwanda back off the ground again. Well, Rwanda's now dead. We're not going to go back to Rwanda, which is why Robert Jenrick is stupid to even think about putting in his policy commitments.
Well, I promised my viewers my most intellectual panel, and I think they lived up to their billing, as always, even with Michael standing in for my Lord Goodman. After the break, I will be speaking to the man who worked for years behind the scenes in the Reform Party operation amidst Nigel Farage's offer to make more than 1,000 Tory councillors defect.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
True crime is everywhere.
Yeah, next weekend, CrimeCon UK takes place in London. And joining us now to tell us more about that event and the true crime phenomena is former detective Stephen. How do you pronounce your surname? Keogh. Sorry, Stephen.
That's all right.
I should have texted you before.
No worries.
And Nancy, and again, Nancy, what's your surname?
Bourne.
Thank you. I'm showing my ignorance there, but thank you both for joining us. So, Stephen, you're a former top cop. Hope you don't mind me describing you as that. At CrimeCon and other events like that, do you get into sort of the semantics of the investigations and, you know, how... For example, how I was watching something the other night where somebody was unfortunately murdered, but you saw the crime scene investigators trying to work out from which side the person was attacked from. Did the knife come from the left-hand side or the right-hand side? Is it all that kind of stuff?
So for me, everything I've done since I've left the police is about sharing that knowledge of investigations, because if you watch TV, they get it wrong a lot. So what we try and do, I'm not the only police officer there, there's experts, so forensic scientists, psychologists, all from that investigative world, just trying to get across, well, actually, this is how it's really done. This is what we do, not what you're going to see on telly. And I think that's really important. So for me personally, coming along to CrimeCon, I just look at the list of people that are there, honestly, and I'm proud to be associated with them. There are some fascinating people there. People who've really fought for justice for their children. People who are campaigning for victims, for survivors. So it's an event that when you look at the name, you might think, oh, they're just going to sit there talking about serial killers and what they got up to. Couldn't be further from the truth. It's really about what goes on, how it impacts the victims, how the investigations are carried out. It's educational as much as anything.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about Rayner's workers' rights and migrants, and the maillogs have been steaming in. And Andy says on union rights, Jacob, I can't help but notice that your programme is on 4 days a week, so surely you support such a measure. Well, I'm busted, I suppose. The reason I started with 4 days a week was because I was an MP when I started doing this, and on the 5th day, I was in North East Somerset doing constituency work. But I no longer have that excuse. You're quite right. And on migrants, James says, don't you think Italy's problem is fundamentally different to ours, and therefore we couldn't copy their plan? Their problem is different, but the European courts, or rulings that come from their courts interpreting European law, are stopping them sending people to Albania, and they've ruled that a country has to be safe in every part to be able to send somebody back there. We've just got to stop the rule of lawyers and get back to democracy. Talking of democracy, a recent poll found that more of the public have a favourable view of Nigel Farage's Reform Party than they do about the governing Labour Party. That may not be saying that much, considering Labour's chaotic start to its period of government. However, Nigel Farage today announced he has emailed all 1,300 Conservative council members begging them to defect reform. It's a characteristically bold move that serves as a reminder that the Reform Party is good at seeking the initiative and needs to be treated seriously, especially by my friends in the Conservative Party. I'm joined now by somebody who knows more about this than anybody else, Gwaine Towler, the former head of media at the Reform Party. My first question for you is a technical one. Mm-hmm. When on earth, under GDPR, did Nigel manage to get these 1,300 email addresses?
Honestly?
Yes.
He whistled, or somebody in the office whistled, and a bunch of volunteers came in and sat and went through every council website
and got them
pulled out the emails that way.
Oh, that's very impressive.
So
it's hard work.
Legit.
Yeah, it's hard work.
I think about 10 came in from over London, and they did it in one day.
Right, it's very impressive. And you've got 2 so far who have come in?
The three that were made public today, came out public today. One is Essex, county councillor, but he left the Tories about a month ago, but joined us. And the other 2 are Scotland. Now, obviously, we've not emailed the councils in Scotland.
Right.
But what you see, and with that, and recently we've had one in Bolsover, a couple in Southend, there's others coming over in Norfolk and elsewhere around the country. This email that's gone out to those we are going to be standing against and at the council elections next year is on top of a process that's already starting. In May, we only won 2 council wards. Mm-hmm. In the council elections in May, 2 and haven't. And since then, on election day itself, we may have won 5 MPs, but we also won a seat, the Spurn Head seat in East Riding of Yorkshire. So that one. And since then, we've won a by-election in Blackpool. These aren't great numbers. However, the process is going. We're getting defections across the country. This letter is a reminder to the 1,300 Tory councillors that we will be standing against them. And if they share our viewpoint and if they share our belief system, would it not be wise? Look at what happened with Lee Anderson, your colleague here.
Yeah.
The only Tory to win a Red Wall seat wasn't a Tory anymore. He was fighting for reform.
Well, I'd say he's still a Tory. He's just not a member of the Conservative Party. But you may think that, because I think Nigel is a Tory. I think you're a Tory too, but not members of the Conservative Party.
Indeed.
It's a very interesting point. I'm surprised that from a PR point of view, and I know you're no longer head of PR, you didn't have a number who were going to announce that they come over straight away. Just perhaps you do in the next day or two, because that's the sort of follow-through that you would want to have from a news management perspective.
If you are emailing 1,300 Tories, 1,298 will leak.
Yes, but
So
then you have a few
no
in the
point.
pipeline first.
There are others in the pipeline. We had the 3 that came out today.
All right, but we do
there
have...
are others, but it takes... Not only do they have to think about it and come back to us. I mean, some have emailed today, of course, and some have said, don't email me again, of course. But the point being is we have to do the vetting. We have to, OK, they might want to come, but maybe we don't want them.
And vetting is really important, because it's the thing I want to move on to, because I know you're looking to make big inroads in the local elections in May. Then you will need to put up into the thousands of candidates.
Correct.
Your vetting for the general election was almost as bad as that of the Greens. Nobody cared about the Greens, but they cared about you. You were under the microscope.
Of course.
You will be under the microscope again.
Of course.
Will you have the vetting in place?
Yes.
And how can you be so confident? Because it didn't work with the MPs.
Not because for the general election, it was so important to us to get candidates in every seat that we could, that the vetting system we had put in place was essentially closed down in October, and some bad apples came through. Since election day, the very first people who were employed after the election was a vetting team, and we've been absolutely committed to that. And so, am I confident? Yeah, I'm confident. But look, it doesn't matter how good your vetting is. You can't spot everything. You don't know. So 1 or 2 may break through. We don't know. But that's the same as every party.
And will you be looking to put candidates in all the council seats, or will you be looking at particular areas where you're strongest at the moment?
I think we are going to focus on those places we're strongest. But of course, if there's 1,300 seats, just as with the general election, we would like to have 1,300 candidates. But that depends on whether we get the people coming forward, whether they pass their vetting, and various other things. But yes.
1,300 Tory councillors you've written to. What is a good result? 50, 100, 5?
Me? Obviously, I'm no longer part of the system, and I don't know what the benchmarks that they're setting.
But looking at it from now, you're outside.
In 2012, we wrote to all Tory councillors, and there were quite a few then. There are far fewer these days, Jacob, as you know. But we got 20 in 2 months that had responded to that email, and that was many thousands who received the email back in 2012 for UKIP. But we got about 20. Well, as I say, I don't know what they regard as a good result. I would say that would be a good result out of 1,300. But a lot of other people, some people are writing back, as I'm sure you would, say, well, why don't you not stand against me? If we'd written to you as a member, your response would have been, well, why not stand, why not reform, not stand against me? Because you know I'm a good chap. Well, we are going to stand.
Yes, well, you did indeed stand against me, as you were completely entitled to do. The issue there is that if we both stand against each other at the next election, there is a very high risk that we continue with a hard left Labour government, and that ultimately, in a first-past-the-post system, which is not going to be changed in the foreseeable future, we need somehow to work out how we work together. How do you think we can do that?
I think, and you've been an observer and a participant over the many years, hitherto, the Brexit Party, the precursor to reform, is the only party that has, as we put it, put country before party. Starmer was going on about it during the election. I don't believe he had any interest, nor do I believe the Tory party has any interest in doing that. They have not done so far. The arrogance with which they've treated our gesture and how we've worked in the past, we don't trust them.
Look, I threw out a suggestion at the Tory party conference that the Tories might do a deal in the 89 seats, I think it is, where you come second to Labour. Is there any mileage in anything like that, or am I
think it's far too early to even talk about that. I'm not, as I say, but I would think that that's 89 seats, come the time of the general election. I don't believe that either of the Conservative leadership candidates will lead the Tory party into the next general election. I think the Labour Party will completely make a kibosh.
All right. Sorry. Well, on that, we've got to finish. Thank you very much to Gawain. Up next, it's the great Patrick Christys. Patrick, you've got Kemi Badenoch on this evening, haven't you?
I do indeed, and I'm reliably informed that she has just entered the building, so that's all good stuff. There's a heck of a lot to go at, actually, with Kemi. I mean, one of the criticisms of her, and there haven't been many, is that potentially she's a little bit light on policy details. We're going to try and get into the weeds of that, I think, but there's some other stuff in town as well. You know, David Lammy's been banging on about reparations since goodness knows when. Well, now it's all coming on top for the Labour Party, isn't it? Les Battersby of Coronation Street fame, otherwise known as Bruce Jones, he's actually been finally killed off by the soap. He's angry about it, and he's going to join me live on air to reveal what really goes on behind the scenes on Coronation Street. Just another one for you as well. The true cost of illegal migration accommodation, £41,000 per person per year, has been revealed. How the heck do we stop that?
Well, that's all very interesting. I probably know more about the Archers than I do about Coronation Street, but never mind. I'll be back on Monday. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. And the weather in Somerset this weekend, it is going to be a haven. It will make the Seychelles look damp and cold. It will just be glorious in Somerset.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. We've seen cloud progressively build in the west all day, and that cloud will bring heavy rain overnight. In the east, it's drier, but even here, increasingly cloudy as an area of low pressure moves into Ireland, bringing a slow-moving weather front, hence the advancing cloud through the day. But that cloud will be thick enough to bring showery rain into the southwest and then Wales through the evening, as well as Northern Ireland after around midnight. Some heavy bursts and some wet weather expected in places overnight, but drier to the east, even if it is increasingly gloomy by dawn. A lot of low cloud around, some mist and hill fog. A few cloud breaks are possible, but on the whole, it's generally a grey start to the day, a mild start because we've still got this southerly wind direction, so by 7 a.m, 14 or 15 Celsius. However, for southwest England and for parts of Wales and Northern Ireland, we've got those outbreaks of heavier rain. Some showers pushing into the northwest of England and western Scotland. Drier to the east, but a lot of cloud. Just a few breaks possible there for the northeast of Scotland. Otherwise, for many, well, it is a overcast start to Friday morning and doesn't brighten up much through the morning either, except for the southwest, where we do get some breaks in the cloud returning by the afternoon, albeit with an increasing breeze and some showers. Meanwhile, cloud and rain slowly moves into the Midlands and the southeast.